There is a book sitting in your home right now. Maybe on a shelf. Maybe in the drawer. Maybe buried under other things you meant to get back to. And inside that book on a page most pastors have never preached from, a man wrote your name. Not your legal name. Not the name on your birth certificate. Your prophetic name. Your covenant name. The name God gave your people before any empire ever touched you. He wrote it 2,600 years ago. And everything happening in the world right now, the wars, the economic tremors, the sense that something enormous is shifting beneath your feet, it is all in there. Every single piece of it. My name is not important right now. What is important is what I found. I was not looking for a viral video. I was not chasing a headline. I was sitting alone with a text that is 2,600 years old, reading a chapter that most Sunday school curricula skip entirely, and I stopped breathing.
Breaking news.
Because what I read did not feel like history. It felt like this morning's news. It felt like the notification you dismissed on your phone before you clicked on this video. It felt like the gas price you saw at the pump this week and tried not to think about. It felt like the question you have been carrying for years but could never find the right words to ask. Why does it always feel like we are paying for someone else's war? The prophet's name was Jeremiah. He lived in a time of collapsing empires. He watched the great powers of his age rise and devour each other. He watched ordinary people absorb the shock waves while kings made decisions in palaces. He knew what it felt like to be forgotten by the powerful and remembered only by God. And in the 49th chapter of his book, he wrote something that should not be possible. He named a land. He described its military destruction. He named the method forces converging simultaneously from every direction. He named the target, the foremost of their might, their strategic power, broken. He named the aftermath, their leaders removed, their people scattered. And then in the same breath, in the very next verse, he named the restoration. In the latter days, I will bring back the captives. Latter days. That is not ancient history language. That is end-of-age language. That is the language prophets reserved for a specific, final, irreversible turning point in human history. And the land Jeremiah named, its modern name is Iran. But here is the part that stopped me cold. Here is the part that made me close my laptop and sit in silence for 20 minutes. Jeremiah was not the only prophet who wrote about this land in the context of something much larger.
To the mountains.
Isaiah wrote about it too.
Lies that way.
And when Isaiah wrote about the shaking of that same land, he placed it in the same sentence as Cush, as Egypt, as the islands of the sea. One sentence, one prophetic breath, connecting the trembling of Persia to the rising of Africa, connecting the fall of an ancient military power to the restoration of a scattered people. Your people. Before this video is over, you are going to see something that cannot be unseen. You are going to watch a thread run from Genesis, the very first book, through Jeremiah, through Isaiah, through Daniel, through the Psalms, through the book of Acts, all the way into the economic data published this year. The same names. The same lands, the same peoples, over and over again, across 30 centuries. You are going to understand why the shaking of one ancient land is the signal for the rising of another. You are going to see yourself not as a bystander in someone else's story, but as the reason the story was written. And you are never going to read the news the same way again. Do not skip ahead. Every piece of evidence in this video builds on the last. The case I am making is cumulative, like a prosecutor presenting before a jury. If you skip ahead, you will miss the architecture. You will see the conclusion but not understand why it is inevitable.
We have nothing
Stay
left.
with me, because what God wrote about you 2,600 years ago is the most important thing you will hear this year. And it starts with a chapter most people have never opened. Let us begin. There is a question that nobody asks in church. Not because the question is dangerous, but because the answer is. The question is this: how specific does a prophecy have to be before you are no longer allowed to call it coincidence? 1 detail? 2? 5? What if a single prophet writing with ink on animal skin,
Time is short.
in a language most
prophecy
people
must be
today
written now.
cannot read, name the exact geographic location, the exact military target, the exact method of attack, and the exact sequence of events unfolding in a region of the world right now? At what point does coincidence become testimony? At what point does pattern become proof? That is the question the 49th chapter of Jeremiah forces you to answer. And you cannot answer it honestly without first understanding who Jeremiah was and what it cost him to write what he wrote. Jeremiah did not write from comfort. He did not write from a palace or a pulpit with an eager congregation waiting to receive his words. He wrote from the margins.
The offerings exceeded our
He wrote
expectations.
while the people around
Indeed,
him chose flattering
harvest is
prophets who
bountiful.
told them what they wanted to
Prosperity is
hear.
upon us.
He wrote while kings ignored him. He wrote while his own people threw him into a cistern, a pit with no water, only mud, and left him there to die. He wrote while the empire he warned about was already gathering at the gates. Jeremiah was not popular. Jeremiah was not celebrated. Jeremiah was accurate. And accuracy, in a world that prefers comfort, is always a costly gift. But before we open that chapter, I need you to understand one more thing about this man. The person who rescued Jeremiah from that muddy cistern, the person who went to the king and demanded his release, was not a fellow Hebrew prophet, was not a temple priest, was not someone from his own tribe. It was an African man. His name was Ebed-Melech. He was a Cushite from the ancient kingdom of Cush, the land we now call Ethiopia and Sudan. An African man saved the prophet whose words we are about to examine. That is not a footnote. That is the first thread. Hold it. Now the first words of that prophecy land with the weight of a verdict. I will break the bow, the foremost of their might. Elam is the ancient biblical name for the land we now call Iran. That is not interpretation. That is cartography. Every Bible scholar, every archaeologist, every ancient Near Eastern historian confirms this without controversy. And the bow was not a casual weapon. The Elamites were legendary archers feared across the ancient world for their military precision. The bow was their strategic signature, the thing that made other nations calculate twice before engaging them. So when the prophet wrote those words, he was not writing poetry about sticks and strings. He was writing about the dismantling of a nation's core military capability, their strategic power, their deterrence. Whatever the foremost of their might looks like in the age in which you are reading this. Then comes the method. Forces from 4 quarters of heaven converging simultaneously. This is not a prophecy about one enemy marching from one direction. This is a prophecy about convergence. Naval forces, air forces, multiple actors, multiple fronts, a coordinated, multi-directional operation against a single target. Written 2,600 years before the age of aircraft carriers and fighter jets. Then the aftermath, their people scattered, dispersed across nations. Not one nation receiving them, every nation. A diaspora born from the shaking. And most preachers close the chapter right there. Because what comes next changes everything. And it changes it in a direction that most theological frameworks are not prepared to handle. The next line does not say, "I will destroy this land." It does not say, "I will abandon it, forget it, erase it." It says, "I will set my throne there." When a king sets his throne somewhere in the ancient world, it means he is taking authority over that territory. It means he is not passing through. It means the shaking was not the destination. The shaking was preparation. You do not prepare a throne room by leaving things exactly as they are. You clear the ground. You remove what was there before. You build something new on the foundation of what was torn down. God was not destroying for the sake of destruction. God was clearing the ground for something He intended to establish. And then comes the verse that most preachers never reach. The final promise, delivered in the most future-pointing language a Hebrew prophet could use. "In the latter days I will bring back the captives." That phrase "latter days" is eschatological language. It is the language reserved for a specific turning point. The end of one age and the beginning of another. The prophets used it carefully. They used it intentionally. And it is used here to describe the restoration of the very people whose military was just broken, whose population was just scattered, whose leadership was just removed. The shaking is not permanent. The shaking is purposeful. Judgment and restoration. Shaking and rebuilding. Destruction of the old and establishment of the new. This is the pattern established in a single chapter. And it is the pattern that will govern everything else we examine in this video. Most of us were taught that prophecy, like this, is historical. It happened back then. It applied to people back then. It meant something to people back then. And by the time it reaches us thousands of years later, thousands of miles away, it is merely interesting, merely educational. But that final promise will not let you do that.
Confess.
Because the prophet did
Confess.
not anchor his words to a nearby generation. He aimed them at the generation that would witness the convergence of everything else he described. The question is not whether he was accurate. The question is whether you are paying attention. And now, before we move to the second chapter, I need to show you something that will permanently change how you read your Bible. Because Jeremiah was not writing in isolation. At the same moment in history, in the same prophetic tradition, another man was writing. His name was Isaiah. And Isaiah looked at the same lands, ancient Persia, the kingdoms of Africa, the islands of the sea, and he wrote them all into a single sentence. A sentence that connects the shaking of Persia to the rising of Africa in one prophetic breath. And that is where chapter 2 begins. There is a verse in the book of Isaiah that has been sitting in your Bible your entire life. You may have read past
and so
it.
we stand before this emptiness,
Your pastor may have quoted around it.
Of what was,
Your Sunday school teacher may have summarized the chapter without ever landing on this particular sentence. But once you see what Isaiah wrote, once you understand what he was actually saying, you will never be able to unknow it. The 11th chapter of Isaiah contains a prophecy about recovery. God setting his hand a second time, the second time, to gather his scattered people. And the locations Isaiah names form a map. A map that stretches from the ancient Middle East through Northeast Africa, through the African interior, and across the oceans to distant islands. Stop at those 3 words. The second time. Isaiah does not simply say God will recover his remnant. He says God will do it again. The first time was the Exodus, Moses, the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the liberation of an entire people from the most powerful empire on earth. That was the first time. Isaiah is prophesying a second Exodus,
Thought I'd lost you.
a second recovery, a second gathering, not from one location, but from every location on that map. From the kingdoms of Africa, from the land of ancient Persia, from the distant islands across the sea, all at once, all in the same prophetic moment. And what triggers this second recovery? The shaking of the nations on that very same map. Now here is where I need to give you my personal reading of this text. Because I have sat with this chapter for a long time. And the thing that strikes me most is not just what Isaiah said. It is what Isaiah assumed. He assumed that his readers would know why those specific locations mattered. He assumed that the connection between the land of ancient Persia and the kingdom of Cush, between Iran and Ethiopia, would be obvious. He did not explain it. He did not footnote it. He wrote those names in the same breath as if everyone already understood they were connected. And the reason they were connected goes back much further than Isaiah. It goes back to the very first chapter of human genealogy. It goes back to the Table of Nations. The Table of Nations is the chapter that traces the lineage of every people group after the flood. Most people skip it. It reads like a list of names that are hard to pronounce and seem disconnected from anything relevant. But it is actually the most politically and prophetically loaded chapter in the entire Torah, because it tells you where everyone came from. And more importantly, it tells you who is related to whom. The sons of Ham, Cush became Ethiopia, Mizraim became Egypt, Put became Libya. These are the fathers of African civilization. The Nile kingdoms, the great libraries, the pyramids, the trade networks that stretched from the Mediterranean to the heart of the continent. All of it traces back to the sons of Ham. And separately, in a different branch of that same family tree, Elam is listed as the firstborn among the sons of Shem. Cush descends from Ham. Elam descends from Shem. 2 different sons of Noah. 2 different branches of the human family. And yet Isaiah places them in the same prophetic sentence thousands of years later. Why? Because this separation in genealogy does not mean separation in history. Africa and ancient Persia were deeply interconnected civilizations. Ancient trade routes connected the kingdom of Cush through Egypt and across the Arabian Peninsula into Elam. Scholars at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago have documented extensive networks between these peoples dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. These were not isolated peoples who happened to share a Bible verse. They were trading partners, neighbors across ancient routes, peoples with overlapping commerce, overlapping knowledge, overlapping spiritual traditions. Isaiah was not randomly grouping them. Isaiah was describing a family, a scattered family, a family that empire after empire had broken apart but that God intended to gather back together. And this is where the prophecy stops being ancient history and starts being personal. Because the phrase Isaiah uses for distant coastlands, the islands of the sea, is not vague poetic language. In Hebrew prophetic literature, scholars consistently interpret that phrase as referring to lands across the ocean. Lands were scattered, people were carried far from everything they knew. Think about that geography for a moment. The African interior, Northeast Africa, distant coastlands across the ocean. That is not a random scattering. That is a specific trajectory. That is the exact trajectory of the African diaspora, carried from the interior of Africa, processed through the coastal regions, transported across the ocean to distant islands and continents. Isaiah drew that map 2,600 years before the first slave ship was built. And God said, from every point on that map I will recover them. The second time. Now I want to pause here and be honest with you about something. Because I know what some of you are thinking right now. You are thinking this sounds like someone reading what they wanted to find into an ancient text. You are thinking this sounds like confirmation bias dressed up in scripture. And I respect that instinct. Critical thinking is not the enemy of faith. Critical thinking is the protector of genuine faith. So let me address that directly. The locations Isaiah names do not require interpretive gymnastics. The geography is documented. The archaeology confirms the ancient connections. The scholarly consensus on these identifications is without controversy. What I am doing is connecting those documented conclusions to each other. And that connection, Isaiah placing ancient Persia and the kingdoms of Africa in the same prophetic sentence, that connection is in the text. I did not put it there. Isaiah did. 2,600 years ago. But there is one more layer to this map. One more thread that connects the ancient world to the moment you are living in right now. And it is found in the book of Acts, the day of Pentecost. The Holy Spirit has just fallen, and the writer Luke, recording with careful historical precision, lists the nationalities of the people who were present. Among them, people from the land of ancient Persia, from Elam. They were not late arrivals. They were not observers. They were recipients. They heard the gospel in their own tongue on the day the church was born, which means that the restoration Jeremiah promised in the latter days, I will bring back the captives, had already begun to manifest at Pentecost. God was already moving 2,000 years ago. And what we are witnessing today is not the beginning of that movement. It is the acceleration of it. From the table of nations to the prophets to the birth of the church. The same lands, the same peoples, the same promise, over and over again, woven together by the same hand. And now I need to show you where that thread leads next. Because Daniel, the man whose visions describe the rise and fall of every major empire in human history, did not receive those visions in Jerusalem. He did not receive them in Babylon. God specifically positioned Daniel in one location, the ancient province that Jeremiah wrote about, the land that Isaiah included in his map. Standing on that ground, Daniel saw something that no general, no king, no emperor could see. And that is where chapter 3 begins. I need you to do something unusual for a moment. I need you to close your eyes and travel. Not far, not physically, but across time, 26 centuries back, to a specific place, a specific moment, a specific man. The year is approximately 553 BC. A man named Daniel is standing in the ancient province of Elam. Not Jerusalem, not Babylon, the heartland of what we now call Iran. He is standing at the citadel of Susa, the capital, beside a river called the Ulai. Daniel is in exile. He was taken from his homeland as a young man, stripped of his name, forced to serve in a foreign empire, trained in a language and literature of a civilization that conquered his people. He knows what it means to be displaced. He knows what it means to carry the memory of a home you can no longer reach. He knows what it means to be faithful to a God who seems from the outside to have gone silent. And yet, God chooses this moment, this place, this exile standing on foreign soil, to pull back the curtain of time. Picture it. The heat of the Persian sun on Daniel's face. The sound of the Ulai River moving beside him. The massive walls of the citadel rising behind him. He is an outsider in an empire that conquered his people. He has no military power, no political authority, no army behind him. He has only his faithfulness. And that, it turns out, is exactly enough. Because suddenly the heavens open, and God shows Daniel something that no general, no king, no emperor could see. He shows him the pattern beneath the pattern, the structure beneath the chaos, the divine architecture that empires mistake for their own genius. In the vision, Daniel watches the greatest empire of his age, the Medo-Persian Empire, the very empire he is standing inside, charge across the ancient world unstoppable. And then he watches it fall, shattered in what appears to be an instant. And from the ruin rises another, which also falls, kingdom after kingdom, rising and falling. Each one convinced it is permanent. Each one discovering it is not. Now here is what I need you to sit with. Daniel received this panoramic vision of collapsing empires while standing on the soil of the very land Jeremiah wrote about it, Isaiah included in his map. God showed him that no empire standing in that place is the final empire. Every power that has claimed that land, the Elamites, the Persians, the Greeks, the Parthians, the Sassanids, the Arabs, the Mongols, The Ottomans, every single one of them believed they were permanent. Not one of them was. That is not pessimism. That is the testimony of 2,600 years of history recorded in a single vision. And the man who received that vision was not a king. He was in exile, standing on foreign soil, seeing what the kings around him could not see. Now I want to give you my personal reflection here, because this is the part of Daniel's story that most sermons rush past. We spend so much time on what Daniel saw that we forget to ask why God positioned him where he did. Why that land? Why not Jerusalem? Why not Babylon, the center of imperial power at that moment? I think the answer is in the positioning itself. God did not give Daniel this vision from the center of power. God gave Daniel this vision from the margin, from the edge, from the place where displaced people stand. Because the people at the center of power never see clearly. They are too invested in the system they're benefiting from. They are too comfortable to recognize the cracks. But the people at the margin, the exiles, the displaced, the ones serving in systems that were not built for them, they see things the powerful cannot afford to see. Daniel saw the truth about empires because he was never fully inside one. And that perspective, the perspective of the exile, the scattered, the displaced, is precisely the perspective that God has always chosen to reveal his deepest truths through. Now, from the vision of Daniel, I need to take you to a psalm written approximately 1,000 years before Christ, 3,000 years ago. 2 lines, 13 words. Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands to God. First, princes shall come out of Egypt. Not refugees, not migrants, not people escaping. Princes. The Hebrew word points to leaders, rulers, people of authority and influence. The psalmist is prophesying a moment when Egypt produces leadership, not servitude. When Egypt sits at the table not as a client state, but as a sovereign voice. Second, Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands. The Hebrew word behind that word, soon, does not mean eventually or someday. It means urgently, hastily, with desperate, forward-rushing purpose. Ethiopia stretching out her hands is not a passive image. It is an image of a nation moving towards something with intention, with the kind of urgency that comes from finally understanding what you were always meant to reach for. Now here is where the prophecy meets the present. And I want to be careful here because I am not making a political statement. I am making an observational one. In 2023 and 2024, Egypt and Ethiopia joined BRICS, the economic alliance that now includes 11 full member nations. The exact 2 nations named in that ancient psalm. 3,000 years after those words were written, the exact 2 nations the psalmist named are now sitting at the table of a global economic restructuring. You do not have to agree with every policy decision those nations make. You just have to be honest about what you're seeing. And what you are seeing when you lay all these prophetic threads alongside each other is a convergence. The same lands, the same peoples, the same pattern, over and over again, across 30 centuries. Shaking followed by restoration, Displacement followed by recovery. Empire falling so that something older and truer can rise. But there is one more dimension to this story that most people never examine. Because prophecy does not only operate in the spiritual realm. Prophecy operates in economics, in markets, in the price of oil and the cost of bread, and the gap between what a day's work earns and what a day's survival costs. The book of Revelation describes a black horse. Its rider holds a pair of scales, and a voice declares, "A measure of wheat for a full day's wage." The prophecy describes a moment when a person works an entire day and can barely afford to eat. That is not metaphor. That is an inflation model. That is purchasing power being systematically destroyed while the basics of survival become unaffordable. And the same voice adds, "Do not harm the oil and the wine." Oil and wine were luxury goods in the ancient world. So the prophecy describes a moment when ordinary people cannot afford basic food while luxury goods remain protected. The poor absorb the shock. The wealthy stay insulated. Tell me that does not sound familiar. Tell me you cannot map that economic dynamic onto the world you are living in right now. According to the Federal Reserve, the median white family in America holds approximately $84,000 in wealth. The median black family holds approximately $4,000, a ratio of more than 6 to 1. When inflation rises, it is an inconvenience for a family with $84,000 in reserves. For a family with $4,000, the same inflation is not an inconvenience.
Please.
It is a crisis.
There's nothing. Get up.
It is the difference between making rent and not making rent. It is the difference between feeding your children and telling them dinner is smaller tonight. A measure of wheat for a day's wages. Do not harm the oil and the wine. That is not ancient poetry. That is a description of the economy you are navigating right now. And here is the question that sits underneath all of this. If the shaking of empires always produces economic suffering at the margins, and if the people at the margins are always the ones God promises to recover, then the economic suffering is not the end of the story. It is the signal that the story is entering its final chapter. The shaking produces the suffering. The suffering precedes the rising. The rising is the point. And the people who rise according to the prophets, according to the psalmists, are the ones who have been at the bottom of every empire's weight for 3,000 years. That is not coincidence. That is covenant. Now I need to take you to the final chapter before the outro. Because everything we have examined so far, the prophecy, the genealogy, the economics, the geopolitics, it all converges on one question. What does it mean for you? Not abstractly, not theologically, personally, right now, in the life you are actually living. That is chapter 4. Everything we have examined so far has been building toward this. Not toward a theological conclusion. Not toward a historical summary. Toward you. The person sitting where you are sitting right now. In the body you are living in. Carrying the history you are carrying. Asking the questions you have been afraid to ask out loud. Because here is the thing about prophecy that most teachers never tell you. Prophecy is not primarily information. Prophecy is primarily identity. God does not reveal the future so that you can be impressed by His knowledge. God reveals the future so that you can understand your place in it. And your place in what we have been examining in all these prophets, all these chapters, all these names is not on the sidelines. It is not in the footnotes. It is not in the margins of someone else's story. You are not the background. You are the point. Go back to that promise in Isaiah one more time. The Lord shall set His hand again the second time to recover the remnant of His people. Remnant. That word is doing enormous work in that sentence. In Hebrew, the word is share, and it does not simply mean leftovers. It does not mean the people who were not important enough to be destroyed. In Hebrew prophetic literature, the remnant is the preserved portion, the part that was specifically kept, the part that survived precisely because it was destined for something the destroyers could not see. When gold is refined, the dross burns away. What remains is not the inferior portion. What remains is the purest portion. The remnant is not what was left behind. The remnant is what was saved on purpose. Now think about the history carried in your bloodline. Think about the Middle Passage. Think about what it took to survive that crossing. Historians estimate that between 1.5 and 2 million people died in transit during the transatlantic slave trade. They did not survive. The ones who survived, your ancestors survived because something in them would not be extinguished. Not because the conditions were merciful. The conditions were not merciful. Not because the system allowed for survival. The system was designed for extraction. They survived because something older than the system was at work in them. Something that the system could not name and therefore could not destroy. Covenant. The preserved portion. The remnant. You are not the descendant of people who merely endured. You are the descendant of people who were specifically kept. There is a difference. And that difference is not sentimental. That difference is prophetic. Now I want to bring back the man we met in chapter 1. Ebed-Melech. We touched on him briefly, the African man who rescued Jeremiah from the cistern. But I need you to understand his full significance. Because his story is one of the most quietly revolutionary in the entire Old Testament. And it has been sitting in your Bible your entire life. Jeremiah has been thrown into a cistern.
Oh God, help
a
me.
pit.
It's so cold.
No
I
water,
can't breathe. No.
only mud.
Oh, please.
Sinking. Left there by the very people who were supposed to carry his message. And the person who goes to the king who advocates for Jeremiah's life, who personally organizes the rescue operation, is an African man serving in the court of a foreign empire. An outsider. A displaced person. Standing in a palace that was not built for him. And speaking truth to a king who had the power to silence him. He did not stay quiet. He did not calculate the political risk and decide it was not worth it. He went to the king and he said that man in the pit is going to die. And that is wrong. And the king listened. And Jeremiah was rescued. Now here is the part that most people never reach. After the rescue, God speaks directly to Ebed-Melech through the prophet he just saved. Because you trusted in me, I will deliver you. Your life will be your prize. God saw the African man who saved his prophet. God remembered him by name. God gave him a personal promise of protection in the middle of a collapsing empire. While kings and armies and systems crumbled around him, the African man who spoke truth at personal risk was specifically covered. That is not a footnote. That is a pattern. And the pattern extends further than one man. There is Simon of Cyrene from the region of modern Libya, North Africa. When the weight of the cross became too heavy to carry, an African man was chosen to carry it. There is the Ethiopian official in the 8th chapter of Acts, a man of great authority, the treasurer of the Queen of Ethiopia, reading the ancient prophets in his chariot on a desert road, searching for understanding. And a messenger is specifically sent to him, not to the crowds in Jerusalem, not to the religious leaders in the temple, to this one African official searching for truth on a lonely road. The first individual conversion recorded after Pentecost. An African man.
We must move now.
And there is the church at Antioch. The first place followers of the way were called Christians.
We need more time.
The leadership of the church included men from North Africa. The first multiracial church leadership team in the history of Christianity. And it included men from Africa. This is not revisionist history. This is the text. Your ancestors were not late arrivals to the story of God. They were present at every turning point. Present. Named. Significant. If what you are reading right now is resonating with something deep inside you, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Truth does not spread by accident. It spreads because people like you make the decision to carry it forward. Now let me speak to something deeper. Because I know that some of you have not just been carrying the weight of historical displacement. You have been carrying something more personal. The weight of being told explicitly or implicitly that your story does not matter. That your history began in chains. That the greatest thing your ancestors ever did was survive someone else's system. That your spiritual inheritance is borrowed. That your contribution to civilization is either invisible or invented. I need you to hear this clearly. Those are lies. Not mistakes. Not misunderstandings. Not gaps in knowledge. Lies. Deliberate, systematic, sustained. Because a people who know their true history cannot be managed by a false one. A people who understand their prophetic identity cannot be contained by someone else's narrative. A people who recognize themselves in the text of God cannot be controlled by the interpretations of those who benefit from their ignorance. The suppression of this knowledge was never accidental. It was architectural, built into systems of education and theology and media precisely because the truth is too powerful to be allowed to circulate freely. And yet here you are. Which means the architecture failed. Which means the suppression did not hold. Scattered. But not silenced, displaced, but not destroyed, stripped of name and language and land, but never stripped of covenant. Isaiah 60:1 is not a future tense command. It is a present tense declaration. Arise, shine,
Together we
not
stand.
prepare to arise. Not consider shining when circumstances improve. Arise. Now. Here. In the middle of this shaking, because that is exactly when light matters most. Not when everything is already bright. When everything is dark. That is when a single light changes everything in the room. You are that light. Not someday. Now. And the rising is not individual. The rising Isaiah described was not one person. It was a remnant. A gathered people. Recovered from ancient Persia and the kingdoms of Africa and the distant islands of the sea. All of them. Together. The diaspora reconnecting with the continent. The continent reconnecting with the diaspora. The scattered family finding each other across the oceans. Across the centuries. Across the wounds. And building, not just surviving. Building. The shaking of one ancient land and the rising of another are not two separate events. They have never been two separate events. They are two movements in the same divine symphony. And the conductor has been planning this performance for 3,000 years. You are not late to the concert. You are exactly on time. Because the movement that features you, the movement that the prophets saw, that the psalmist declared, that the exiles stood on foreign soil to receive, the movement is playing right now. And it is your turn to sing. Let me bring you back to where we started. A book sitting in your home. A page most pastors skip. A man who wrote your name 2,600 years before you were born. We have traveled a long distance together. From the cistern where Jeremiah was left to die, rescued by an African man who refused to stay silent, to the province of ancient Persia where Daniel stood on foreign soil and watched empires collapse in a vision from God, to the table of nations where the genealogy of Africa and Elam were written into the same family record, to Isaiah's map where one prophetic sentence connected the shaking of Persia to the rising of Africa, to the ancient psalm where songwriter 3,000 years ago described Egypt producing princes and Ethiopia reaching forward with urgent hands,
God's light is upon us.
to the day the church was born where people from the land of ancient Persia stood in the crowd and heard the gospel in their own tongue, to the economic prophecy of Revelation where the reality of empire was described with the precision of a modern economist. Every thread, every location, every name, pointing in the same direction, toward a moment, toward a people, toward you. And I want to be clear about what I am not saying. I am not saying that one people group is superior to another. I am not saying that the suffering of any nation, any family, any child caught in the machinery of war is acceptable or justified. When empires collide, the people who pay the price are never the ones who started the fight. They are the mothers hiding their children, the fathers standing between their families and the door, the soldiers far from home following orders they did not write. I pray for every one of them, without exception, without qualification, because the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sees every sparrow that falls. What I am saying, what the text has been saying for 3,000 years is this. The shaking is never the destination. The shaking is the mechanism. Every time God has allowed an empire to shake Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Rome, he was not destroying for the sake of destruction. He was clearing the ground. He was preparing a space. He was making room for something that the old system was blocking. And what he was making room for every single time was the people at the bottom of that system. The exiles. The displaced. The scattered. The ones who survived not because the conditions were merciful but because the covenant was unbreakable. So here is what I am asking you to do. Not as a subscriber. Not as a viewer. As a covenant person who just received covenant information. Study. Open these ancient texts for yourselves. Read them with your own eyes. Do not take my word for a single thing I have said in this video. The truth does not need to be protected from your scrutiny. The truth gets stronger the harder you examine it. Build. Whatever is in your hands right now, your skills, your network, your creativity, your resources, build with it. Not someday. Not when conditions improve. Now. In the middle of this shaking. Because that is exactly when builders are needed most.
My child.
Teach.
Look
Teach
at
your
me.
children who they are before the world tells them who they are not. Give them the names: the African man who saved the prophet, the man from Cyrene who carried the cross, the Ethiopian official who was reading the prophets on a desert road. Give them the map. A child who knows their covenant cannot be defined by someone else's curriculum. Connect. The diaspora and the continent are not two separate stories. They are one story interrupted by empire, and the interruption is ending. If this video has spoken to something real and you share it, not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, share it because there is someone in your life right now who is asking the same questions you were asking before you clicked play. Someone in your family group chat. Someone in your prayer group. Someone sitting across from you at a dinner table who has been carrying the same quiet wandering. Truth does not spread by accident. Truth spreads because people who have received it make the decision to carry it forward. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to keep following these threads wherever they lead, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what we covered today is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of one. Now, before I let you go, one last word to the person who came into this video carrying something heavy. Maybe you have been feeling lost in a world that seems to be accelerating towards something you cannot name. Maybe you have been asking questions that nobody around you can answer. That feeling was not confusion. That feeling was recognition. Something in you already knew. Something in you was already oriented toward the truth before you had the language for it. And now you have some of the language. Use it. Not to argue. Not to divide. Use it to build. Use it to heal. Use it to call your people forward. Jeremiah was in a pit. Daniel was in exile. Ebed-Melech was a stranger in a foreign court. The man from ancient Persia stood at Pentecost far from home.
The ancient
The
prophecy.
Ethiopian official was
The
on a
serpent will
desert
rise.
road with words he could not fully understand.
The stars will fall.
None of them were in ideal conditions. None of them were waiting for the perfect moment. They were faithful in the moment they were given.
Let it go!
And that faithfulness in a pit, in exile, in a foreign court, on a desert road became the hinge on which history turned. You are in your moment. Not a rehearsal. Not a preparation. the moment. And the symphony that God has been conducting for 3,000 years is still playing. Your part has not been cut. It has been saved. For exactly this movement. For exactly this hour. Arise. The conductor is waiting.